Good evening. Happy Thursday. It is me, Corey Burton, flying solo tonight. Wanted to drop a show here before it got too far away from football season. Israel is wrapping up his football season with he's at their banquet right now, so they're handing out and dishing out awards there at Thomas County, and so he won't be joining me tonight. But I do have a couple questions that I want to leave on the docket for him. So I'm excited to be here. It's the Believe in Georgia Dogs podcast on the Believe Network. Again, Corey Burton. Follow me at Coach Burton36. Follow the show at Believe_in_Dogs, and you can find them on. You can find that show at Believe in Dogs on Instagram, and of course at Coach Corey Burton on Instagram for my personal account at Troopstar28 if you want to follow Israel. So lots to talk about, lots to kind of prime you for. And lots of things happening, but I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that we are presented by Underdogs Fantasy. That's right. It is a new partnership that we've gotten, and it is a unique approach to fantasy sports. It's a simple pick'em style format. You can select players you believe will outperform expectations without complexities of traditional DFS. Daily fantasy sports. The user-friendly interface and growing community makes it easy and fun to play. So like I said, hashtag underdog. So go to Underdog Fantasy. You can, they have a lot of great things on their website, and it's not like betting is a dirty word for Underdog, and you pick under overs on everything, and it's really, really good. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with that, and you can make picks, you can win money. Like Justin Jefferson, you can say higher or lower, and they give you like a receiving yards total or touchdowns or whatever the case may be. And it's like I said, it's really good. And I'm gonna share my picks with you guys. In a graphic. So if you follow me on social media, that is your incentive to follow me on social media, and also follow Israel on social media as well, because again, that is how you're going to follow us. All right. So Underdog, you should get into it. Like I said, it's a unique way to play fantasy sports. So without further ado, let's get into it. When you look at Georgia's season, okay, when you look at how things shook out, when you look at the way the Sugar Bowl ended, when you look at how the SEC championship shook out and how everything kind of played out with the season, with the quarterback, with Mike Bobo and all that stuff, it leaves you to wonder, okay, what could have been, right? What could have been? What was what if Carson Beck performed better? What if the receivers hadn't dropped something? What if Dylan Bell doesn't drop that pass in the Sugar Bowl? What if, Gunner calls the right protection and gets rid of the ball, or they just kneel on it at halftime? Does things change in that Sugar Bowl game? There's a lot to consider with how this season went, but I think the first thing that I think is on a lot of people's minds is in fact the coaching staff and what seems to be happening with that. What I think people, and I'm a little disappointed too. I don't know what the answer is, and I can't wait to ask Israel about this. But when you look at Stacey Searles, when you look at Mike Bobo and how their respective units perform. For Mike Bobo, it's the whole offense. For Stacey Searles, it's the offensive line. Now, there's a lot of flaws within this offense, and I just don't know. I don't know that Mike Bobo is the right fit to call plays. It's obvious he's a great recruiter. You can't understate that. He's a great recruiter. He has a lot of tenacity, a lot of passion for what he does. I think he understands offensive football. Like I think he gets it. I think he understands and can draw up some good schemes. And I think I think there's a lot of things that he understands, but I don't know what it is about his play calling. Like you look at it and I'm an offense coordinator myself, so I understand kind of what goes into the art of play calling and all the things you have to think about, all the things you have to consider, the matchups, what the defense is giving you, what they're doing, what they do well, what they don't do well, who are the disruptors on that side of the ball. What receivers do you have at your disposal? Who's in a slump? Is your quarterback, what's going on with that? What is the defense doing to muddy up things and muddy up your reads? All that stuff you have to take into consideration. The environment, the weather, Coach Smart in your ear telling you things. All that you have to take all that into account when you judge a play caller, offense and defense. In this case, it's Mike Bobo. So when you evaluate, and a lot of people are, hey, fire Bobo, fire Bobo, fire Bobo, fire Bobo, fire Bobo. I don't know. I don't know if that's obviously Kirby. I trust Kirby and his judgment, and if he thinks Bobo is the right fit, then Kirby Smart, who has played in 3 national championships, won 2 of them, has played in the college football playoff 1 additional time, and has played in the SEC championship, I think, for like 6 years in a row, up to a certain point. And his judgment's good. But when it comes to Mike Bobo, okay, here's what I don't understand about his play calling. Maybe Israel can answer this for me. Here's what I don't get. What I don't get about his play calling is it seemed like against Notre Dame, he went away from things that were seemingly working. I don't know if it's because that, there's things that are scripted or there's certain situations, but I think he just lost complete feel of the game. And I'm not trying to make excuses when I say this, and I don't want it to be construed as that, but there's part of me that's like, okay, well, given everything that happened with Kirby's dad, what was happening in New Orleans at the time with the terrorist attack where the guy drove down Bourbon Street and killed 14 people, they're locked down in their hotels. There's just a lot of things happening that night and that week that made things get off kilter, that made things weird. And that probably played a little bit into the vibe, like the execution wasn't there. And so it's hard to really blame, the team for not playing at their full capability. I think after halftime, it finally turned into a football game, but I think the damage had been done, and Georgia never really shook out of that funk. And Notre Dame realized, when Notre Dame shook out of their funk, they realized, hey, we got to prove something to the world, to the college football world, and they did. And Georgia just never really bounced back, never really responded. And I think, that aside, had that been Mike Bobo's only kind of weird game, then I think a lot of people would have just wrote that off as, hey, it's a weird environment, it's a weird thing, it's a weird happening. So, but when you look at just his play calling in general, a lot of things come into mind when you think about that. A lot of things pop into my mind, at least when I look at his play calling, when I look at how it went down. How did his play calling improve or regress when you had Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards too? When you lose those guys, like how does it regress that badly? Like how does Carson Beck go from being considered one of the top picks in the NFL draft and NFL mock drafts, one of the number 1 players in the country, Heisman, he's on the Heisman list. He's all over the place. Like, as, hey, Carson Beck's going to be the best. He's going to carry the torch for the SEC at the quarterback position. He's going to be this, that, and the other. Did some of that go to his head? I don't know. But it just seemed like Mike Bobo was trying to call plays very carefully. And then Carson Beck went into a funk. And Carson Beck started turned the ball over. Wide receivers started dropping the ball. Like it's almost like everyone didn't know what to do when Brock Bowers left. No one, it just seemed like, and Georgia was still winning games, except for Ole Miss, which was just abysmal. And they lost to and they lost one other game, and they lost to Alabama, which they got absolutely murdered in the first half of that game. And they came back to their credit, but like first half of games is like I don't know what he was trying to do. Like it almost felt like he was just a boxer that was just trying to feel out the fight, and you jab a couple of times, but a lot of times you hope your defense can keep you from getting haymakers landed on you. And against Alabama and against Ole Miss, defense couldn't quite prevent that. And so Georgia got their backs up against a wall, and against Ole Miss, they never recovered. Against Alabama, they did and almost won. But it's one of those things where, like, the play calling just seemed systematic again. It seemed like it seemed like 06, 07 Bobo, where it's like, okay, it's third and long, so I have to go to my sheet and say, okay, I got this for third and long. No matter what's working, what's not working, I don't think he had a feel for that this year. I don't feel like he had a feel for that this year. And I think that's where everyone's gripe is like last year, I think he was systematic in a lot of ways, but you could tell when his instincts took over, the feel of the game kind of took over. Like you can tell when all that happened, because all of a sudden you get this smooth machine offense where it's just slice and dice and here we go. But you can also tell for Mike Bobo, and a lot of coordinators are guilty of this, but in our case it's Mike Bobo, you can tell when he gets on script too much and he's like, okay, well, we have to run this. Okay, we have to set up this. It's almost like he's doing checklist. And I just think it gets things out of rhythm, gets things out of whack. I think you get in a tendency to, and you get into predictable play calling, like in predictable situations, like running screens on third and long, or, getting backed up or taking a loss on first down. And you don't get into the right plays, and Carson's not really checking out of the plays to get you into good plays, things like that. That I think that as a coordinator, I think he's like system focused and like, hey, we're going to make this work, and we're going to make this. I've got this plan in my mind, and it's mapped out, and it's going to work. And when it starts to not work, he stays on script. Versus, hey, what I really loved about Todd Monken, and what I thought Mike Bobo learned, and what I think Buster Faulkner learned, and he took with him down to Georgia Tech, is, you have to figure out where your team is. And I think Monken did a really good job of that. He figured out what his team was. Like he had a walk-on quarterback that had the swagger of the greatest player in the world, the greatest player of all time, had the swagger of that, could run a little bit, and was dynamic, and had extremely good leadership skills. And he knew it, and he knew he could galvanize the team. So he focused on letting Stetson Bennett do what Stetson Bennett does. He found ways. He understood that 19, Brock Bowers, he understood that Brock Bowers was the go-to guy. He understood that. And so he got the ball to him. And he found ways to scheme the ball into Ladd McConkey's hands, into Brock Bowers' hands. And by doing that, he opened up other possibilities. He saw those possibilities, and he took them. I think Mike Bobo gets on script a little too much. I think he's like, it's 3rd and 7, so I got to, this is my 3rd and 7 call. Okay, it's 3rd and 7 again, so I got to go to the next one. Like, it just seems like he's, I don't know. And I know he's really good. I know he's really, I know he has a lot of football knowledge, and I know all of that, right? But again, I wish that he had a better. I wish he had a better feel of the game, because I think he gets away from him some, and that's a fair criticism. It is. It's a fair criticism, and I wish that he could with 3 weeks and Gunnar Stockton, he's a totally different quarterback than Carson Beck. I think it's fair to be critical of the fact that it did not seem like we were ready to operate with Gunnar Stockton. Gunnar Stockton should not have been overwhelmed in that game because they had 3 weeks to work with them to do things that Gunnar Stockton does well so that he doesn't get overwhelmed and so he stays comfortable. And when a quarterback is comfortable, he can make plays. And then you can start getting into some things where now you force him to have to call a protection. Like he put Gunnar Stockton in a situation right before half to where he had to make a protection call against a look that Notre Dame probably worked on to confuse him. And Notre Dame and a young quarterback's going to get confused. But I think if you do things that make young quarterbacks comfortable, like quick game, and for Gunnar Stockton, getting him involved in the quarterback run game. I think if you do those kind of things and have a plan designed around those things, I think you make him comfortable. And when he's comfortable, he can sling the rock. I don't necessarily know about calling protections. Maybe, I don't know, like maybe you should take control of that. Like maybe you shouldn't trust your brand new starting quarterback to call a protection in that situation. Maybe the right call there was to just run the clock out and go to halftime. You preserve a 3-3 tie at that point, and you go into halftime. At worst case scenario, there is no momentum to either side. But now in that scenario, you go into halftime, and the avalanche is coming down the mountain. That gold avalanche of Notre Dame is coming down that mountain, and it's going to engulf you. And I think this is where the gripe with Mike Bobo is. And I've gone 17 minutes on a rant about Mike Bobo. But I think it needs to be said. I think it's fair to be critical. And so that's something that I think needs to be looked at is, okay, your quarterback is now probably Gunnar Stockton or Ryan Puglisi. Now, Ryan Puglisi, I don't think he's a runner like Gunnar Stockton is. He can run. He can if you need him to. I don't think that's his style. But I think if you're going to go with Gunnar Stockton, I think you have to be able to let Gunnar Stockton be Gunnar Stockton. I think too much of the time in football, not just Georgia, but in football, I think too much of the time you get these coordinators, offense or defense, you get these coordinators and you're like, okay, this player has to fit into this role, right? Instead of making this role fit into this player, which I think if you look at all the successful coordinators out there, they make the system work for their players versus making the players work for their system. And yeah, I know Georgia can recruit anybody they want to. They can get guys that fit their system. But there is no perfect quarterback for your system. It's an imperfect system, imperfect players. Humans are imperfect. So you have to plan for that. You have to say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we got to do, and this is how we got to roll. This is how we got to operate. So you have to be ready for that. And I think Gunnar Stockton has the ability to be quarterback one next year. I think this core of pass catchers that is coming in that we'll talk about on a later show that I'm excited about, the portal class and the high school class. I think Nitro Tuggle is going to be outstanding. I think Frazier, Nate Frazier is going to be really good at running back. I think you're going to have a chance to have an explosive offense again next year. But in order to do that, I think you just need to figure out what you want to try to do, because it just seemed like this past season we were wandering aimlessly through the play sheet trying to find an identity, and you never really did, because Brock Bowers left a giant void in your offense. Ladd McConkey left another giant void in your offense. So you have this canyon before you even assess losing anybody else. You have this giant canyon that was pretty much 95% of your identity, and then the other 5% was your run game. Like Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, they're battling for offensive rookie of the year, by the way. They leave, and all of a sudden you go into your offense goes into the tank for the most part. And your defense, it was a weird year. It was a weird year. You win the SEC, but like how? You watch this team, you're like, how is this team? And that's a quality that I love about this team is the fact that I have to ask how they won it. They won it on guts. They won it on grit. They won it on, defense making plays, and they won it on being opportunistic. But like that doesn't sustain. Like that's not going to take you on a title run, but it did get you into the dance, and it did get you that SEC trophy. So to me, as you look for 2025, your first goal is this: find an identity, because you're nothing without an identity, because you don't have something to fall back on. You don't have something for the players to latch onto and say, this is who we are, And when Ohio State finally realized that, they started kicking everybody's ass, right? Like they spent the whole season trying to find their identity. They've been through the same thing. And Jeremiah Smith and that receiving core and Will Howard have been there the entire year. But for some reason, they couldn't find their identity until the playoffs, when they realized these receivers are good at football. This is who we are. And you know what happened with the team? They ignited. They became the aggressors. The national title runs. You know what happened with those teams? We knew our identity. We knew what we were. We knew we had an elite defense, and we could be aggressive on offense and not have a thing to worry about, because our defense was giving up 6.5 points a game. We knew we were going to we knew that no matter what, this team was going to beat you up. They were going to be more physical than you, and they were going to take your will. They're going to run the ball down your throat, then throw it to Brock Bowers and let him embarrass you, then throw it to A.D. Mitchell and let Stetson do his thing. And Stetson had enough swagger for the entire team. And that's who they were. They knew that. They played to that. And that's why that team won. And the same thing the next year. Slightly different players, but same identity. And they knew it. Last year's team, I think, even had an identity. They just got upset in the SEC championship by a hungry Alabama team. Otherwise, I think that team wins a national championship. They had an identity. They knew what they wanted to do. It took them a minute to find it, but they did, and they started playing really well down the stretch of the season. This year's group never really found it. Never found it. They found it against Texas both times. They had an identity only in those two games, really, if you think about it. Otherwise, I think they were just floundering around trying to find out what that was. I didn't every game that I watched, I didn't know what Georgia was trying to do. I did not know what Bobo was trying to accomplish offensively. And defensively, I think we were just playing catch up a lot of times. And defensively, I think we had a lot of communication errors. But we had no offensive identity. We really had no defensive identity. Like, that was kind of weird that we went through a season like that, where both units struggled to find who they truly were. And that comes with no leadership. Your supposed leader on offense is driving around in a Lamborghini, making TikTok videos and talking to his influencer women's basketball girlfriend who plays at Miami. So his head is in Miami and his body's in Athens. Doesn't really match up. So when you look at the way this team played, it played like a team that had no leader. It played like a ship wandering aimlessly through the sea. And you had Glenn Schumann and Mike Bobo could not create an identity for them to buy into. The players did not create an identity for them to buy into, and nobody really bought into anything. And it just kind of seemed, and you could tell. And this team won on grit, resiliency, and talent. They won on talent. They won because they had more talent than you did. That's how they won. They didn't beat you. They won, which is different. Doesn't sound different, but it is different. So that's my thoughts on that's my thoughts on 2024. So looking ahead, again, figure out what you want to do at quarterback. Figure out what you want to do offensively. Like, figure out who you are. And I think that's going to take a little foresight, but figure out who you are and play to that. Defensively, figure out what you want to do. Figure out who you are and play to that. and come hell or high water, live or die, play to your identity. That's what I appreciate about teams like Vandy. That's what I appreciate about teams like Notre Dame, teams like, Texas. They understand what they are. I thought they kind of fumbled a little bit. Arizona State, they knew what they were. They were picked dead last in the Big 12, but they knew who they were, and they played to it. And they were like, you know what, Cam Scattaboo, he's our dude. They knew that, and they rode that all the way to the playoff, right? These teams that have identities do extremely well. Like Ole Miss knew who they were. I think tried to outsmart themselves, but they knew who they were. I think Florida eventually will figure out who they are. I think they kind of started to down the stretch of the season because they played some really good football when DJ Lagway got healthy. So that's going to be a scary team. Georgia Tech knows who they are. They know they just got to find some more pieces defensively to be able to stop some people, but they know who they are and what they want to do. That's what makes them scary. So find an identity. Find out who you are, find out who you want to be, and play to that. And that's what's going to make 2025 a year that Georgia can win a national championship. Georgia's a contender. They always are. They're a contender as long as Kirby Smart's the head coach, Georgia's a contender for the national championship. They just got to realize it. They got to figure out who they are, what they want to be, and go with it. If you want to be a team led by Gunnar Stockton, lean into it. He's a runner. Lean into it. He's a runner. He can throw. He's a good quarterback. He's got a good arm. He's accurate. He's smart. He's got leadership like crazy. And he's a good runner. Let him do that. I didn't see any of that against Notre Dame. Let him do that. Figure out what you want to do, how you want to do it. And I think that'll make everyone's job easier for position coaches. Like, you think Coach Cyril's is going to have a better time or easier time trying to coach this team when hey, this is what we want to do. This is our hat hanger, and this is what we're going to build off of. Yeah, because those guys are going to buy in, and they're going to make all the calls. That unit's going to most definitely improve, and I think just with finding an identity. So that's my 2 cents on that. But before we go, talking about basketball for a second, I'm really excited about this season, despite what happened. Despite what happened last night against Tennessee, getting absolutely shellacked. That game was so bad that that game was so bad that they cut to the Texas-Oklahoma game early. They mercifully cut out of that game. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's embarrassing. And you look at it and you're like, okay, well, this is not good. Not good at all. So, but Asa Sewell is playing tremendous. This team was ranked. It's the first time you've heard that about a Georgia team in a long time, right? They have some dudes. They still I just think this basketball team, they go on these stretches where they're just not sharp, and I think it's again it's a scenario where you just gotta I think at times this is a very young team. I think at times is a team that can show its immaturity by taking bad shots, giving up the ball in adverse situations. And like last night, they let Tennessee, they were up 26-25, I think, coming out of half. And next thing you know, you blink to the first media timeout, it's 51-26. And you're like, what the hell just happened? Tennessee went on this massive run, and Georgia couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't hit shots. They couldn't defend. They couldn't do anything. And I think those are scenarios that a lot of that's just lack of experience in Georgia, not in this basketball team, not being able to adjust to that kind of thing, or not being able to, I don't know, just not playing together enough, or there's just a lot of things that you're looking at and going, okay, all right, here we go. But turnovers, getting beat in rebounds and all that stuff. That's just, you can't have any of that stuff, man. And they played really good on the road in the first half. And this also shows how deep the SEC is. This also shows how tough it is to win on the road. But again, you can't turn the ball over 19 times. You can't get dominated on the boards, right? They can't. And also Tennessee was 57% shooting. And so they improved by 30% coming out of halftime. So that's that helps too when you're trying to make a comeback. But they just got to figure out how to take care of the ball, and some of that's youth. Got to find ways to take better shots, and you got to find ways to get second chance points. And you keep the other team from making runs. You keep all that stuff at bay. So still a lot to be excited about this team. Tennessee is one of the top teams in the country. So this is not a game that you should look at and go, well, Georgia sucks again. No, Tennessee's good. Don't let that thrashing against Florida tell you any differently. This Tennessee team is good, especially at home. And they're going to be a force in the tournament. So is Florida. So is Auburn. So is Mississippi State. So is likely Alabama. They're all going to be ridiculous in the tournament. There's going to be a lot of SEC teams make it to the tournament. I think if Georgia just fixes the turnovers, they get a little bit better in rebounding, and they just play I know this sounds kind of elementary, but they just play better. It'll be fine. So anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. Just a quick show. I can't wait to discuss everything I talked about in this show with Israel. Like, I want to ask him about Mike Bobo's play calling and what's going on with it being kind of seemingly all over the place. And because he played under Mike Bobo. Like, so he knows. And I want to ask him about the quarterback situation. I want to ask him about, like, my thoughts are Georgia just didn't have an identity. They couldn't find one for a lot of reasons, probably, but they just never really found one and never really took. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. So, but hope you guys have a great weekend. Play Underdog Sports, please. Underdog Fantasy is the place to be, right? You make your picks, higher, lower. It is outstanding. And when you make those picks, you can make a lot of money, right? You can make a lot of money. So make your picks and play. Like I said, Underdog offers a unique approach to fantasy sports. It's a pick'em style format, and it makes it easy and fun to play, right? You do your research, you get in a good entry fee. You got some good payouts, some prizes, awards, things like that. And so when you create entries and you can enter contests, you can set lineups. There's a lot of projections going on. But the higher lower thing is really, really super simple. So you should check it out and subscribe, all that stuff. And we hope you come back and see us next time. I'll have Israel with me and we'll talk. All right, that's gonna do it. Peace out. Go Dogs.